Ooh, another white boy with a podcast. Pronouns, Jim Bro. Another white boy with a podcast. You want to see the video? It went viral.
Hi Gains Gurus and welcome to TMGP, the Muscle Growth Podcast, episode 34. I am your host, Roscoe, and today we're welcoming Jeffrey Siegel onto the show for part 2 of his 2-part series. Jeffrey Siegel is a prominent health coach and educator known for his integrative approach to wellness, particularly in the realm of men's health. He is the founder and CEO of Jeffrey Siegel Wellness, where he empowers individuals, especially men, to regain energy, confidence, and balance in their lives. His coaching philosophy emphasizes a holistic view of health, combining mindfulness, movement, and education to foster transformative change in his clients' lives. Siegel's journey into health coaching was influenced by his personal battles with an eating disorder during his teenage years. This experience led him to seek help and ultimately reshape his understanding of health and well-being. He holds a master's in mind and brain education from Harvard University and a master's in Buddhist Studies from Hong Kong University, where he focused on integrating psychology and spirituality into health practices. As a certified personal trainer and dynamic eating psychologist, Siegel has developed a range of coaching services aimed at enhancing physical and emotional well-being. His work includes executive coaching for self-care and work-life balance, as well as teaching mindfulness and stress management techniques. He also facilitates workshops on self-compassion and healthy relationships. In November 2015, Jeffrey helped create a TED talk titled "What Makes Muscles Grow," which has garnered millions of views. In this presentation, he discusses the biological mechanisms behind muscle growth, emphasizing the importance of sleep, nutrition, and exercise. He explains that effective muscle development requires intentional challenge and recovery, highlighting how factors such as hormones and genetics play critical roles in this process. Siegel believes that many individuals are not adequately taught how to care for their bodies or maintain their health. Through his work, he aims to provide the necessary resources and support for people to live healthier lives. His approach is characterized by a commitment to fostering communities that support individual growth and well-being. In summary, Jeffrey Siegel is a dedicated health coach who combines personal experience with professional expertise to help others achieve sustainable wellness through an integrative approach that encompasses both mind and body. In today's episode, we dive into a wide range of insights. Some of the topics include the importance of having goals, the shadow side of fitness, insecurity, feelings of not being enough, life throwing curveballs, how to mitigate hard things, what makes muscles grow, the TEDx talk with over 20 million views, challenge and rest and recovery, reason for exercise, finding your why, common blocks to exercise, ignorance, scared to start, not knowing how, arrogance, incorrect info such as men's health, emotional, body dysmorphia, comparison to others, negative self-image, options, having a partner or trainer, getting a home gym, minimizing barriers to entry, such as the time to gym and the commute to workout, making it social and easily accessible, making it part of your routine and identity. Ego is the illusion that we can control everything in life. Importance of flexibility with routine, making gym accessible to women and children, increasing exposure, comparing yourself versus yourself, scans, pictures, realistic progression, social media not being reality, comparisons of old, i.e. the 50 people in our tribe versus now against the whole of social media, a large portion of the world, the body does a lot, or the body doing a lot. It keeps us breathing and alive, lots to be grateful for. What is it capable of? The relationship with mind and body, auto-regulating and listening to your body, the mind-body connection, the complexities of energy balance with regard to energy expenditure through exercise, and so much more. Get ready for a truly informative episode. If you're injured or in recovery, visit theinjuryconsultant.com and schedule a free consultation to explore how I can support your healing, restoration, and journey to thriving health. The Injury Consultant now offers specialized packages for fat loss, muscle gain, and longevity. Interested? Book your free consult today. A little disclaimer. This show does not contain medical advice. The views and opinions expressed by guests on the Muscle Growth podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect my beliefs or the stance of the podcast. While we aim to provide valuable insights and information, it's important to approach all topics with critical thinking. I encourage you to do your own research, consider multiple perspectives, and form your own conclusions. Healthy discussion is always welcome, and I'm happy to engage with listeners in the comments to continue the conversation. Lastly, don't forget to follow us on all major social media platforms, including Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X. Find us at the Muscle Growth Podcast and myself at Reps with Roscoe. On that, I think you mentioned one of the motivators, and for me, I have goals. So, for example, for squat, for bench, for deadlift, for pull-ups, and they're very lofty goals, and it's a 5-year plan to get to those goals. But I'm quite excited, and I'm making good progress so far. So I'm very excited to hopefully attain all of those goals in the next 5 years. That is a big goal and a big reason why I can be there. Even when I don't really feel like being there, I've had a tough day at work or feeling tired, but then that's why you got caffeine, so it can nudge you along,
so like the importance of setting goals. Yeah, that's huge, right? And like and again, anybody who's been in the gym knows this. Any trainer, right, is going to ask you, what are your goals? And we're going to start to set some targets. And I think these things are helpful, right? Like having, like you said, I want to have some squat goals. I want to have some pull-up goals, right? This is why people sign up for competitions and for events, right? I want to run a marathon. I want to do a bodybuilding comp, right? It's like I have these goals. These focus my energy and my effort very clearly now. There's structure, right? And then there's sort of a finish line, right? And then there's a sense of competition, right? There's so many helpful things around that, And I always want to broaden people to, it's like, okay, like what's the finish line after the finish line, right? It's like when you hit those goals, then what, Like what comes next? And I think that can be hard for a lot of people that have been training. It's like you prep so hard for this event, and then after the event or whatever, you hit your goals, and then there's sort of this void or this letdown, and maybe you're not as satisfied or as happy as you thought you were going to be. Which is why I think, the importance of having a larger context for why are you even bothering with any of this at all, right? Are you doing this from this place of, curiosity around like, what is my potential? I want to experience my potential as a human, as a man, as having this body, and I want to know what it's capable of. So I'm going to push it to try to see and explore what's possible there. I think that could be like a really beautiful way into doing all of these things, right? But then there's also a shadow side where like so much fitness, especially like the really hardcore pushing, can be driven from these shadows of feeling like you're not enough, right? Being driven by insecurity, by, childhood things that happened that made you feel afraid and scared. So we make up for it by armoring ourselves with tons of muscle so nobody is going to push us around and bully us, right? So nobody can have power over us, right? To exert our dominance in the world, right? And it's like we need to be really honest with ourselves around like what's driving us to achieve these goals.
Exactly. So I want to give a quote. That's what I was just typing now. That kind of encapsulates what you just said very, very nicely. And I don't know if it's a true quote because you can never know these days because there's a lot of nonsense out there, but it's a really beautiful quote nonetheless. No man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable. And it's attributed to
Aristotle.
On this one it says Socrates. Yeah.
It's like choose your ancient Greek philosopher. I've heard that quote. It's a tremendous quote,
is.
Right? And
if it's true or not, it doesn't really matter. It's a cool quote.
It's a great quote.
Yeah.
It applies to men, I think, and applies to women as well, right? And like anybody who's interested in any sort of personal development,
yes,
right? And personal development doesn't just happen up here in your head, right? It's like we need to embody these things, and physical training is a huge part of developing that strength, that resilience, that fitness, right? And like being fit isn't just about being able to deadlift a lot, right? But it's about being fit to lead. It's about being emotionally fit. So when life throws you some curveballs, which it will, right? It's going to throw some shit at you and make you upset and make you feel less than, right? It's like, how do you navigate through that? And again, training itself can be a really valuable tool because every day, right, you're getting your body into this stress state, but it's done in this highly controlled and purposeful way, right? Where you're pushing to your edge and then you're recovering and you're pushing to your edge, right? And you're testing and you're pulling back, right? So you're learning how to navigate hard things, right? And as, another quote of like, it's like, why are squats so helpful, right? Because when life is pushing you down, right, it's like you're training how to get back up. And so this is why I love working out, right? And it's been such a foundational part of my life. And I do it, as much as my body allows me to, right? Listening to when I need rest. And, these are things we can talk about too, of like how to obviously modulate your training. I know on so many of your podcasts, you get into the weeds, right, around training protocols and what are like rest days look like and nutrition, like, and all of that information is great. So everybody keep listening to Roscoe, keep listening to the Muscle Growth podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. You make a great point there about stress and stress management. I don't want to go too much into it because we've chatted quite a lot about it in previous episodes, but I just wanted to reiterate that a little bit of stress, like you said, like from muscle damage, from having a good workout is not bad. It's chronic stress that is bad. You don't want to be chronically stressed, but to have a little bit of stress is actually good. And the muscles need a little bit of stress to grow. And I think that segues really nicely into how do muscles grow? Can you give us, like, your TED talk is one of the best, like 4-minute clips on the internet. So can you kind of give us that 4 minutes? You can recite that thing verbatim if you want, but can you please give us that talk?
I appreciate you saying that. If you don't know what Ross was talking about, I helped write a TED Ed video called "What Makes Muscles Grow." So just Google it. Google Jeff Siegel, TED Ed, Jeff Siegel, "What Makes Muscles Grow." Watch the video. And so again, it was interesting making this video. Okay, yeah. It was interesting making this video, because they often say it's like you don't really understand something until you can explain it to like a kindergartner and your grandmother at the same time and have both of them understand, right? So finding the language, right? Taking something that is so complex as muscle growth and boiling it down into simple language and then doing it in less than 5 minutes was really just an exercise for me, because I had spent so many years, right, like from teenage years up until now, of like exploring like what the heck makes muscles grow. Because like I want muscles, I want to be strong, I want to help other people be strong, and so this was really just a project, right? To be clear, like I didn't make any money making this video. It's not there to like sell or promote any product. It was really just like I want to be able to share some of these ideas. And I don't know how many years ago, even, it's maybe coming up close to a decade when I made that video. So obviously, the science is evolved as it should, right? And like, gain a little bit more understanding into some of the actual cellular and sort of immune system mechanisms that come into play when, muscle growth and, looking at some of the promoters of growth, right? And like these conversations, just pick and choose online. You can dig into any of them, right? Like is it, muscle damage? Is it the metabolic stimulus, right? Is it the myokines that then promote the inflammation, that then recruit the stem cells to proliferate? and it's like, okay, are we just looking at the muscle, or are we also paying attention to the fascia and then the ligaments? And obviously, like strength, right, has a lot more to do than just muscle, although it's correlated with muscle size, right? Like strength has so much to do with your nervous system. How well can you recruit all the muscle fibers that you have? And then obviously there's this big recovery piece, right? Because like the exercise is the stimulus and the muscle growth is the response, right? And that response is predicated on having adequate protein and amino acids, right? The right mix of hormones, which primarily is determined by how well you're sleeping and how well regulated your circadian rhythms are. And then obviously your nutrition. And are you getting the, not only the right macronutrients, but the right micronutrients to support the cellular metabolism, right? So like there's a million things going on there. I just say like, go watch the video. But I think the important part at like the very end of that video, I tried to highlight what you just said of like, like meaningful growth requires, right? Like some degree of challenge coupled with the right amount of rest and like recovery. And it's like that's it. Like, in some ways it's pretty simple. Right? Like if you want to get fitter, it's like, the right amount of, intensity in terms of training stimulus, right? Coupled with adequate recovery, which, can mean a lot of things to different people, but like that's going to lead to progress. And yet there's so many ways to mess that up. And I did for so many years. I think for so many years, I kind of overtrained, or maybe you could argue that I wasn't overtraining, but I was under recovered. I wasn't eating enough calories to really support the training that I was doing, or I wasn't eating enough, carbs and things. Because, for so long I had been, in this sort of carb phobic, fat phobic mind, and even today, right? Like, you get into ketogenic diets and how great those can be, not only for physical, but for mental health. And it's so difficult to sift through all of these pieces, right? But it comes back to, well, what are your goals? And ultimately, like, what's going to make you happy? Like, I think figuring that piece out, right, of like, is this training making me happy, and is it making me a better person? And when I say a better person, right, I mean better to myself, better to my relationships with people around me, better even to the non-human world, right? Like, if you can say, yes, my training is making me a better person, then I say, great, keep doing whatever you're doing, you're on track. Right. But if your training is not, because it's coming from some insecurity inside of you, or you never feel like you're good enough, right? And it's like causing you to be so hyper focused on, you're tracking your macros, and you feel really guilty if you skip your gym session and then you blew it because you ate all this stuff, right? Like that's not helping you build a better relationship with your body, right? If anything, it's fueling this inner turmoil. And so we need to go back, and we need to look at what the heck is going on there and clean all that up.
I think a lot of people are going to be doing some introspection after this episode.
I mean, that's what, I hope, right? Because again, so much of my work is like, yeah, we can get in the weeds about, the outer game of the training, and like, let's talk, intensity and volume and reps and training protocols. But like, if your inner game isn't aligned, then all of that outer stuff, either A, is going to eventually crumble, or B, you're going to get to some great physique, but you're still going to be unhappy, and you're going to feel unfulfilled inside. And the people around you are probably going to be looking at you being like, dude, I've been trying to tell you something for a long time and you're not listening. Right. So it's like, yeah, we need to go back, and we need to do some of that inner work too.
That's so true. And I love the message. Can we circle? I know you've talked a little bit about some blocks. For example, you mentioned that maybe people don't, fully comprehend quite how important physical exercise and resistance training is. What are some other common blocks that you see? And then can we kind of give some ways to beat the blocks, to get around the barriers that you can suggest that are quick and simple, or maybe not quick and simple, but for you to explain quick and simply?
So, look, in coaching, right, we're always trying to identify like what is the limiting factor, right? When somebody says they want to do something and yet they're still not doing it, which I think we've all had that experience, right? The question is like, well, what's holding them back? Now, sometimes it's just a lack of know-how, right? Of like they, again, and this can go back to our conversation about they had no education. There was no, class in school teaching them how to weight train. They didn't have any adult, role models or mentors, to show them around the gym or to show them how to lift weights. So sometimes it's just like, I don't really know what I'm doing. All right. And therefore I'm not confident, or I'm afraid I'm going to injure myself. Right. And those are sort of the easiest fixes because, it's like there's a million videos you can watch, or you can go hire and, work with a personal trainer, right, to kind of give you that guidance and that know-how. On the other, and especially for guys, there's sort of that feeling of like, well, I can do it all on my own. It's like, I don't need anybody else. Like, I'm going to figure it out on my own. And you can, and for years I did that too, and you kind of muddle your way through a little bit of this, and you hop from this program to that program. And, for me back in the day, it was like just Men's Health magazine, right? Because there wasn't a million Instagram feeds around, like, but it's like each month there was a new Men's Health workout. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this one. And then next month I'm going to do that one. But like, we all know it's like that sort of haphazard training is fine. Like you're going to see some results, but it's certainly not going to be as effective as having well thought out, macro and mesocycles, and having just some more structure to your training program. So that can become a block, for some people, and then I think there are these other more emotional blocks that show up, for people. Gyms can be unfriendly places, right? Where either they walk in and they feel weak, and no guy wants to feel weak, right? So it's like, if you're out of shape, right, and that you're deconditioned, to walk into a weight training room and seeing all these guys lifting heavy stuff and grunting, and right? It's like our minds inevitably get into social comparison mode. And it's very hard to not fall into this, trap of, kind of, shame and sort of, self-depreciation. And so I think that blocks a lot of guys from sometimes, getting in there. Now, of course, with COVID, we've opened up a whole window to online training, and there's so much you can do at home. You can see behind me, I got, I work out right back here all the time. So, you don't necessarily need to be in that gym world. But again, that, that goes back to like having there, so, a workout buddy or a guide, somebody to kind of help you feel safe in that environment, to show you what is going on. And then there's other blocks too around people, this goes into sort of the body dysmorphia piece, right? Where it's like, they look at themselves in the mirror. And again, I think we all probably have experienced some degree of this, right? To a certain extent. And it's like, like you wake up, it's like you go to the gym and then you come home, like you shower off or whatever. And then you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, damn, like I look good, right? And like, sure, maybe you got a little pump going on, right? You're a little more full, right? You sweated out some of that subcutaneous water, right? It's like, maybe, it's like your physique's looking really good, but it's like most of it is psychologically, right? You're looking through these eyes of somebody that, again, that just did something hard. There's a sense of accomplishment, right? There's a sense of progress. There's a sense of pride, right? And all that then reflects back to you. The man you see in the mirror is this strong, proud, accomplished man. You're like, hell yeah, I like that, right? Selfie, boom. All right. But then, the opposite is true. Like you wake up in the morning, like, you ate a bunch of crap, you drank a bunch of crap, right? Like, you haven't worked out in a while. And you look at yourself in the mirror and what do you see back, right? Even if your body, like, even if the body composition is exactly the same, right? You're going to see a different man, right? A guy who's like, feeling down on himself, feeling like he's not maybe living in integrity with what he wants to be doing, or he's not fulfilling his potential. He knows, right? That there's some part of you that isn't showing up the way you want, right? And so when you look in the mirror, you see that reflected back to you, and so like that becomes a block, For some guys, again, they can motivate themselves out of it of like, okay, I'm going to start working out today. For other guys, it's going to pull them deeper into this cycle, right? This sort of vicious cycle, not taking care of themselves. You keep pushing it off, right? So like there's all sorts of barriers. And again, just coming back to what is going to be that limiting factor for you.
And then what do you suggest to like help these people? You mentioned a partner or a trainer. What are some other options for these people? You also mentioned a home gym. Mm-hmm. What are some other options that you can just quickly fire off for people that are struggling to get started?
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the home gym. I just want to reinforce that one. Or at least minimizing, right, the barrier to entry when it comes to working out. Right. Like, and there's so much evidence that like the longer you have to commute to your workout, the more likely it's not going to happen, so stuff that you can do really easily at home or around your home or even just logging in online, right, and doing like a Zoom class with other people, right? So making it social and making it easily accessible is really two big, powerful pieces, I think, when it comes to that. But the bigger piece goes back to what you were saying, Roscoe, initially, of like how it's just become part of your routine. It's just part of who you are. It is part of your identity. So I think, the people that have really made fitness a staple in their life, it's because it's just now part of who they are. That's just like what you do. You're like, yeah, I'm going to work out today because I like it, because of, like, again, all the millions of reasons. Again, choose your motivation, but you're like, it's just going to happen, right? And it's the same difference between somebody who says, it's like, I'm going to cook dinner tonight because that's what I do. I cook dinner, versus some people say, no, like, I never cook. I hate cooking. I'm always going to order out, right? And some people say, hey, I'm never going to work out, or I only work out under these conditions, right? So it's like the shift has to happen at this larger place of identity of like who you see yourself are as, and this goes to training, it goes to eating. When you can start to shift that piece, then the training, you don't end up in this battle with yourself of like, should I work out? Should I not work out? Because that actually creates more cognitive dissonance and discrepancy internally, because you're like, wait a second, no, like, what's going on here? Like, this is not like me, right? So I think that is the level. And again, it's like, there's no easy, simple path. I wish I could, spell out like, oh, well, this is how you change your identity to become somebody who works out all the time, right? But I think it's like when you start to peel through all these levels, right? Figuring out, why is this important to me now in this very moment? Why is this important to me 10 years from now? Why is this important to my family, to my work? Why is training physically important to my mental health? Right. And we connect those dots together to recognize, hey, I'm actually doing this for my mood and for my brain and for my sanity. All right. And then how is doing this and connected to my social health, where we then begin to bring in the other people, right? And maybe that's a workout buddy. Maybe that's a group exercise, and then obviously working out outdoors is tremendous too. So when we can add in that nature element, right, and start to see it as a connection with the non-human worlds, you're going to just get that much more benefit out of it, right? And again, muscles in service of something even larger.
Wow, that's fantastic. I think, you must have been reading Atomic Habits by James Clear there. Are you familiar with the book?
I am familiar with that book for certain.
Yes,
yeah. I think there's a lot of good practical tips in there, and again, in my world, right? I'm trying to help people find sustainable ways to change their behavior. But if you try to fit a new behavior into an already overcrowded lifestyle and identity, then it's never really going to stick, right? So what do we need to do? We need to expand our identity to make enough space for this new thing to then fit in. And then this recalibration happens, right? Again, people live the life they live, right? You're either working out or not working out. All right. Or you're either eating well or not eating well because it's serving you in some way. You've reached a place of homeostasis with your routines. All right. Biologically and psychologically, these things are stable. Right. And that's what we like. Right. Our brains and our bodies like that stability. So anything you do to change that is going to inherently cause some instability, which is going to create resistance. Then there is a pushback of the system, right? You can willpower your way through that for a short period of time, especially if you have highly focused goals. So if you have these clear training goals, you're like, I'm going to train for the next 3 months to do this thing, right? But then at some point, the system's going to push back to try to go back to that initial place of homeostasis, right? Unless you transform the system to then actually come to this new state, right? Where it's like, I'm not trying to go back to have the lifestyle I had before. I'm actually trying to have an entirely new lifestyle that's going to help me become the person I want to become.
Exactly. No, I think it's a fabulous outlook to have. And I hope that a lot of people adopt it if they didn't have it already, obviously. Atomic Habits mentions like you said, lower the barrier to entry. That's a big point, as well as make it a habit. Like, make going to gym a habit, lower the barrier, make it a habit, and then add an accountability partner, whether that's a coach or a friend but get someone to be accountable towards, or yourself. Like if you can do it, but if you haven't done it so far, maybe it's a good idea to have someone else who's also looking to change their life around, or maybe someone that already has because they're already doing it, and then you just join them. It's more simple. Lower the barrier and go from there.
So, I think all of those are useful. Those are definitely helpful approaches, and I want to highlight the piece that, what gets you going into the gym initially, right, is probably going to be different than what gets you coming back to the gym day after day, week after week, month after month, right? And I think we need to separate those two out because they're actually different scenarios, right? So to go from sort of a sedentary life to an active one is very different than, what sustains an active life year over year. And again, there's going to be different motivations in there. There's going to be different pieces that come up with that, and I think I'm all about making habits, but I think that language often becomes too, oversimplified, right? And we look at it in this sort of like Skinnerian behavioral, stimulus, cue, response sort of way. But like, we're too complex, like for that. Our lives and our minds, so I think understanding the when flexibility is needed for a habit, but also, planning for it, right? Like anticipating it, right? Like recognizing as like, it's like life's going to do as many things as it's going to do to try to like throw me off of this routine, right? So instead of trying to simplify and hyper control, again, our egos are really just this like illusion that we can control everything in life. And we can start to really get over attached to things. And that can really lead us in not so great places. So being more flexible in our approach, it isn't easy, but that I think ultimately is what makes these things so much more sustainable.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned flexibility. I think that's a huge thing that is not talked about nearly enough. It's super important to be flexible. For example, I've had a bit of a sore knee recently, and because of that, I had to change my program because I couldn't continue to do the exact same program that I did before the sore knee. And now I'm slowly getting back to my regular program, but I had to be flexible. Same thing in the gym. If the one specific piece of equipment is being used, you can change the order of your workout to then just do it slightly differently or use a different machine. That one time is not going to be the difference. Rather, just adapt and be flexible. I think it's very important to be flexible. And I think a lot of people, like you said, habits maybe come with the connotation of, if you don't do it, it's the end of the world that one time and you might as well just quit on the spot. Whereas I like what you said, where you got to be flexible. Life happens. We're very complex. If there is a reason why you can't get to gym, don't be demotivated and then never go back. So I think it's very important that you bring up the flexibility aspect there. And then I just also wanted to touch on the motivation. Like you said, the motivation to start is probably not going to be the motivation to, it might, but it's probably like motivation or willpower are fleeting. You need to develop the discipline to keep going and to find your why, which I think is what you emphasize quite a lot. And I love that you like to emphasize to people, you need to have a reason for doing it. And then when you find a strong enough reason, then you will do it because you have that reason. And if that reason changes, that's fine. But as long as you have that reason to keep going, you will keep going.
Yeah, I mean, flexibility, right? It allows you to keep progressing, even when life changes, right? So we need to stay open-minded and recognize, right? There's more than one way to build muscle. There's more than one way to eat well. There's more than one way to train in a way that's going to be helpful. So yeah, as you said, I like, use the word adapt. That's essential, right? We need to be adaptable. And what you were pointing out is another one of the barriers that comes up. And I see this over and over and over again, especially around nutrition, right? Which is this all or nothing thinking, right? That's very black and white, right? It's like either I was on my game plan and ate all, perfectly portioned macros today and nailed my calories and my protein, right? Or totally fell off the wagon, and then the moment we cross that line, people usually throw their hands up and say, screw it, right? And then kind of open the floodgates. And that sort of, right, that clear all or nothing thinking just leads to cycles of binging and then restricting or over exercising and then under exercising. It just, you start flip flopping back and forth between these extremes, right? And you never really find a sustainable, balanced way. So I'm always trying to help people move out of that into this more nuanced gray zone where we can begin to integrate those pieces together in a better way.
Absolutely. And your mention of the barriers to entry, where you mentioned about people feeling insecure in the gym, that reminds me of when I was young and just starting in the gym. I was always very fit from playing lots of sport, but very skinny. And I was very worried about I was scared of being humiliated in the weight section because there's always those really big guys there who are actually quite nice. And now that I've learned, but back then they look very scary, very intimidating. And I absolutely refused in school to go to the public gym, the weight section, because I was like, they barely even have weights that I can do. So I'm not going to do that. I'll rather just stick to the circuit. And I think that probably put me back 2 or 3 years of muscle progression and growth. Not entirely. Obviously, you can get some stimulus and whatnot, but I think being scared to start was a big barrier for me. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to overcome that. And I'm now on a path to try and deadlift 300 kilograms. So that's one of my big goals. So it shows you that you can go from literally refusing to lift the weight or even go into the section of the weights to hopefully one day deadlifting 300 kilograms.
And I love that, man. And thank you for sharing that story, right? And it goes back to, starting at a young age, like making physical training, something that kids feel comfortable really like engaging with, right? Like making the gym a friendly place for young boys and young girls. Again, a whole different conversation around women in training and building muscle. But it's like, it's equally as important. Again, if you're involved in athletics, right? Like, if you grew up playing sport, I know you did, a lot of the tennis and other things, right? Like you probably got some degree of that exposure. But not everybody plays sports. And even then, sometimes that exposure can be pretty unhealthy, right? When there's a hyper focus on hitting a certain weight or looking a certain way, right? And like depending on who the coach is, right? Like it can start to get a little bit ugly there. I've heard all sorts of stories. So, again, there's opportunities that we're missing, but we always need to really be thoughtful about how we're going to implement that.
After And the point you made about the man in the mirror, that's also something that I resonate with on a spiritual level. After a good session in the gym, maybe after my sauna or something, I look in the mirror. Also, to be fair, and a note to the audience, I believe, and I've had a lot of people agree with this, mirrors in gyms are often they're often curved in such a way to make you look bigger. So I don't know if that's true for globally,
I don't know. But you got this South African mirrors.
They definitely give you an illusion of looking bigger. Which is really cool because then you're in the gym and you're looking really good. That's why the gym selfies are always, top notch. But anyway, after the pump and whatever, it also adds to it. So I understand all that. And then in the sauna, after sauna, you look really good. The water weight is gone, like you said. And then I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror. I'm like, it doesn't even look like I work out. And that to me is really sad. I'm like, I work out 5 times a week. I eat pretty well. I gym hard. Why is that? But it's that body dysmorphia. It's comparing yourself to those online, which is not a fair comparison. They show you their highlight reel. They show you them pumped up, ready to go with perfect lighting, also editing photos and that nonsense. So it's not a fair comparison. You've got to compare yourself to yourself, which is like I mentioned for myself, looking at the scans, looking at pictures, those kinds of things. And then you can see a realistic progression of you versus you instead of you versus influencer X, which is not a fair comparison. Maybe they gym for that's their entire life. They just gym and eat. And they don't have to go to work and be stressed and have high cortisol and those kind of things, which is not fair, but life's not fair. And you've got to deal with the hand that you've been given. And like you said, you've got to become that person that goes to gym if that's what you want in your life, which you and I recommend putting as part of your life, just because we think it's cool and it's good for you objectively.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. Well said. All of those points are really important, and especially around the social media, around the comparison. And again, we can't help it, right? That's just like, we are social mammals, right? Like, we are designed to always be, thinking about ourselves relationally in terms of how do we stack up in terms of status and power and attractiveness, right? And this is so woven into our DNA and our biology, right? And now we have these social media, which is just sort of taken it and amplified it in this way that's so evolutionarily awkward, where like we never had to compare ourselves, as you said, somebody who does this for a living with like the perfectly filtered training, lights and everything. It's like, if anything, like, we compared ourselves to the 50 other people in our tribe, and that's like a very different set, right? Data set. So like those pieces, I think are really important that we reinforce that, and the one other piece that I come back to is really balancing this tension, right, between self-acceptance, right, and, self-improvement, right? So it's like, on one hand, like, when you wake up and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, man, like, that doesn't even look like I work out, right? It's like having that moment of self-compassion and just accepting, this is today's body, right? Like, your body is not there. It's not trying to piss you off. It's not trying to make you upset. Like, it's doing what it has been doing for hundreds of thousands of years, right? Again, to maintain homeostatic stability, to keep you breathing, to keep all the bazillions of things that it does for you. Like, if anything, we should be extremely grateful, right? So like, there's like, acceptance of our body and also like how it looks, right? And just recognize like our weight is just some relationship to gravity, and like, not getting too hung up on that is really, really important. So I like to hold that in one hand, right? You put out your one hand, and then in the other hand is this place of self-improvement, as I said, of like, okay, like, well, I want to know, what is my body capable of, and I would like it to maybe do some things that it can't do right now. I would like it to maybe fit into some clothes that it can't fit into right now, so like, there are these things that I would like to work on, and it's like, I always try to help people shift from this idea of like working on your body to working with your body. All right. And it's a subtle shift, because we're caught up in this paradigm of mind over matter, where we think it's the job of our mind to control our body, right? I'm going to dictate to it today. Today you're doing, right, 12 sets, right, of deadlifts, and you're going to eat, 500 grams of it, right? Like, we dictate down, right? But like, I want to shift that, right? And so instead of commanding to our body, I want to collaborate with my body, right? It's a two-way road here. My body is always sending messages up, all right? What's going on, right? And is giving me valuable feedback. And when I begin to develop that better relationship of mind and body, I actually unlock a whole lot of wisdom and intuition that my body can hold. And I also make my training more sustainable, because now I'm actually incorporating these feedback signals that can help me auto-regulate what I'm doing with my training and in the gym and how I'm eating, as opposed to just dominating, right? I have this external plan. It looks perfect on paper, and I'm just going to push through it and make it happen, right? But like, there's a cost to that, a physical and a mental cost. And again, anybody who's trained really hard has probably experienced that, right? So it's always a matter of, right, it's like, is it worth it to you? Is the cost worth it to you? And if I'm helping people think about the long game, or looking, again, the longevity piece, being able to do this for decades and decades, and it's like, are you happy with yourself and the relationship that you have with your body? Like, that is so key.
You're exactly right there. And I think it's an interesting one. The feedback you get from your body is very important. And that mind-body, that connection is also integral to how you're going to monitor your progress and how you're going to see yourself. So I think looking at your body and being able to listen to your body is very important. Is there anything that you've had as a long held belief that you've since changed your mind on, or something that you used to believe that now you've completely 180'd and you don't think it's correct anymore?
Yeah, that's a great question. Especially because I talk about the dangers, right, of like holding too dogmatically to any belief, right? Like, that just leads to rigidity in your thinking. So I think one of the biggest things that we all need to do, right, myself included, is to like go back and ask, where am I making assumptions? And are these true and valid, right? And might I be jumping to conclusions that aren't? Am I actually really being honest with myself? One of the things that I think I have really kind of probably 180'd on is, using exercise as a tool to, manipulate and control calories, right? So I think like if you are working out and like your main focus is just to burn 600 calories during today's workout, like that is a fool's errand. And for a long time, I think back when I was in probably I had more disordered habits around eating and exercise, right? And, trying to, again, control all these calories in, calories out. And I'm like, well, if I can go burn 600 calories in the gym, then either I can eat 600 calories later or so on and so forth. And the greater, the more I have both A, come into my own body, again, developing that collaborative, intimate relationship with my body, and then B, really looking into the science of metabolism and energy expenditure, the more I really begin to see that like that degree of control, that calorie game is exactly that. It's a game. It's a farce. And, it really can lead to some pretty disordered behaviors. There's a great paper that I read a couple years ago that was like so wonderful. I'll have to pull it up for you. It was about the mystery of energy compensation, right? And it was basically asking this question of, if you know somebody's basal metabolic rate, and then you throw them on an exercise bike for 90 minutes, right? And you can kind of like pretty accurately measure, okay, they burn, 500 calories during this time. Then you would assume that their total daily energy expenditure, right, would be their basal metabolic rate plus the energy expended from the exercise, right? But then when you go look at the actual data, like that doesn't happen. It never adds up that way, right? It's not so simple. And so the question this paper is trying to figure out is like, well, how is the body compensating for the energy burned during exercise, right? By down regulating these other things, right? And the truth is we still don't really know, right? We don't really have a very good understanding of how the body does this, but we do know that the numbers don't add up very well. Right. And there are things like, your basal metabolic rate can downshift. We know that after a lot of really intense exercise, right, the period, the hours after that, you might be more sedentary, right? So you might be less fidgety, right? Less muscle contraction, less movement. So you're expending less energy. Your body might actually divert resources away from certain organs. It's like it could save calories by, kind of, turning down, say your pancreas and say, we're not going to produce as many digestive enzymes because we spent all of this energy over here riding this bike, so we're going to recoup some calories here. I think a really interesting theory is a lot of this happens at the level of our mitochondria and, in the electron transport chain and how the mitochondria are producing energy and how efficiently they're doing that. Because your mitochondria can always either produce ADP or it can spit things off as heat. And so you can regulate the heat energy production at the level of the mitochondria, which then conserves calories. Your body's saying, oh, right, I just blew all this energy working out. I want to conserve calories here at the level of mitochondria. Like there's so many ways in which our bodies are going to have these counter-regulatory energy expenditure mechanisms, right? Because again, evolutionarily, we don't want to just blow calories because our bodies evolved in this backdrop of scarcity where we didn't know where our next meal was going to come from, right? And, wasting too much energy was a threat to our survival. And so, all that goes to say is like, don't get on the treadmill and obsess about how many calories you're burning and think that number is some sort of magical thing that you can incorporate into your diet. Like that is, it's not going to help.
That's a really interesting piece there. So thank you for sharing that. I think, like you said, it's so multifactorial. It's so person specific that you can't possibly say that it's just the numbers are going to add up. It actually doesn't make sense that they would. So thank you for all those examples of why they're not adding up. And I think that that's a really important piece of advice for people. I think a lot of people have that same belief that you used to have of, if I want to eat more, then I can just burn it off with a 10-minute walk and I can track how many calories that burned. And then Bob's your uncle and that's sorted. But I think you've given a really awesome piece of advice there, that you can't do that. It's a lot more complex than just a simple subtraction, I guess, from your calories and your BMR. So thank you for that. And thank you for everything you have shared today. We really, really appreciate your story and your journey. And I was wondering, with all this work you've done spiritually and to do with wellness and health, do you feel enlightened? And if so, is it a permanent thing or is it fleeting? Does it come and go? How would you sound enlightened, but how do you feel about your level of enlightenedness, if that's even a thing?
I don't think I've ever been asked this question directly, Roscoe. So I I'm gonna take a moment and pause, right?
Go for it.
And I think the way I'm gonna answer this is that when we're talking about enlightened states of consciousness, right? Even just framing them as states, right, makes them seem like this sort of transient thing, like it comes and it goes, right? Versus being like a permanently enlightened state, which we might call a trait, like this fully realized, right, self-actualized, right, like, Buddha, which, I think there is no question that many people throughout the ages who have dedicated themselves to training their consciousness through meditation and through other contemplative practices can reach incredibly high levels of this sort of realization, and perhaps some of these ultimate non-dual states. But like in the non-duality, again, subject-object collapses. The sense of self is not present. Everything is one with everything else, the truth is, it's kind of the Tao that cannot be spoken sort of question, right? Like if I were really enlightened, like that question wouldn't even be a question. And I would say, don't trust anybody who says that they are enlightened. And I think that kind of goes back to one of my fundamental, premises, which is always check your assumptions, try to see what you're missing. I think we all can actually, do some work on ourselves to just better understand the nature of our own mind.
Absolutely. And like you said, don't trust anyone that says that they're enlightened. And it was interesting that you mentioned that you had Men's Health in your background, like the magazine. It's a really cool full circle moment here on the podcast, because in episode 1, we had a little rant about the accuracy level of Men's Health magazine and how it's got some really good information. Don't get me wrong. It's got some top people, Brad Schoenfeld's in there. So there is some brilliance in it, but a lot of it is not the best advice to be following. And unfortunately, it's a really big magazine and it's really popular. I don't know if it still is, but it was at least a few years ago. And there's a lot of not so great advice coming from it that I myself took, and it was not the correct thing. But it also shows you that you need to vet where you're getting your advice from, and you need to maybe, like you said, don't make assumptions. Just because it's in a magazine doesn't mean that it is actually correct. Even if these people have cool titles next to their names, it's important to do your own research. And that's something that we emphasize here on this show, is that if someone says something, it doesn't mean it's true, but we try our best to get cool guests like yourself. So thank you so much for coming on. And then my closing thought, or your closing thoughts rather, what advice or parting words of wisdom do you have for our listeners who are looking to embark on their own journey of muscle growth, health, and wisdom, I guess, or a better word for wisdom, holistic kind of overall well-being?
Well, staying true with the theme of all the things that we've talked about, I'd say one is to, pause and ask yourself this question of like, why do muscles matter to me? And be really honest with yourself, right? And then begin to peel back those layers, right? And take each one and put them in your pocket, right? So you say, I want to be healthy. I want the longevity. because I want to look good, because I want to perform well at some sport that I want to get really good at, because I just want to be able to like play with my kids, or, you know, like lift up my groceries, like because I don't want to be on my meds. Again, like, so like broaden your identity to be able to hold all of these pieces as possible reasons why this matters to you. And don't get overly attached to any one, because it's going to change. It's going to change day to day. It's going to change year over year as your life changes and your body changes. And so I think that when you can begin to get this bigger picture of why this matters to you, then it becomes easier for you to start to just integrate that into your day to day. And then it just becomes, again, part of your life and who you are, right? And as back to that quote, right, of like, if you want to understand what your potential is and you've never taken the time to explore this, there's so many benefits of developing a good physical practice. And again, whether that's with weights or something else, but I'm all about just helping people kind of get, you know, out of this purely heady intellectual world that we live in, where we're so disconnected and so disembodied because of our technology and our lifestyle, to just get back into your body and move, right, with your body in a way, again, that makes you happy, right? And that makes you a better person, right? That's going to enhance all of your relationships with yourself, with others, with nature. When you can do that, then I think you've found a sustainable path.
Wow, thank you so much for reiterating the importance of not only physical health, but how it combines with mental health, and all kind of different facets of health are so interlinked, and you can't just focus on the one, because then the others are going to suffer. So having that holistic approach where it's not just one, and it's all of them, you try and combine them, find your why. Thank you so much for all of your efforts, and for being a coach, for helping people, and for coming onto this podcast.
Thank you, Roscoe.
Thank you for tuning in to the Muscle Growth Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating and a quick review. It helps us grow and reach more people just like you. Don't forget to follow us on all major social media platforms, including Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X. Find us at the Muscle Growth Podcast and at Reps with Roscoe. For more insights, exclusive content, and full episodes, visit themusclegrowthpodcast.com. Your support truly makes a difference, so please like, share, comment, and follow. We're grateful for every bit of it. Until next time, keep pushing your limits and staying focused on getting bigger, stronger, and better.